Brian Bearer on WNYC. Well, I don't have to tell you that finding an affordable apartment to rent in New York City is harder than ever. And the rental market can be opaque, right? Like, where do you find out what's available? How many hoops do you have to jump through to get the apartment? And how do you beat out everyone else looking for the same kind of thing? Well, WNYC and Gothamist reporter Catalina Gonella has some reporting that might make you take a hard look at an offer that seems too good to be true and maybe avoid some pain. The report is titled, How an Alleged New York City Real Estate Scammer Stayed in Business Despite Years of Complaints. Maybe you heard the radio version on Morning Edition or All Things Considered. And she joins us now to talk about this one, quote, real estate advisor, why rental scams in general are hard to put a stop to, and what to do if you think you've fallen for one. Hey, Catalina.
Hi, Brian.
Tell us about the alleged scams, and I stress alleged, but what was the story you heard from people who claimed to be victims?
Sure. So I spoke to well over a dozen people who told me very similar stories. Of course, the details were a little bit different in each case, but usually they say that they were looking for apartments and in one case, a commercial space. And they typically were in kind of financially tight situations when they came across one of David Michael's listings, usually on Craigslist. And they say that he showed them the spaces in person and that they asked them for deposits to take the apartments off of the market while they applied. And they say that he told them that that the deposits were refundable if the deals fell through. But when they eventually didn't get the apartments for a variety of reasons, all but one say that he didn't refund them.
Listeners, I want to broaden this from the individual allegations against this individual advisor, as he calls himself, to the general topic. Have you had similar experiences to what Catalina was just describing in the allegation in trying to find an apartment to rent? Or even if it worked out, did you feel like the process was shady in some way along the way? Any advice for avoiding scams in the rental market? Call or text us at 212-433-WNYC. This can help other people as they enter, the rental market, as people do every day. 212-433-9692. You can call or you can text. To be clear, this man whose name you mentioned, David Michael, calls himself a real estate advisor, not a broker. What's the difference?
Sure. So I can tell you what I know, which is, one of the first things I did when I got a tip about this was reach out to the Department of State to ask them if they had complaints about this person. And they told me that his license, that he was briefly licensed, but his license was revoked over a decade ago. And after they had received 15 complaints. So that's what we know about his status as in the real estate.
Did you hear from anyone who actually got the advertised apartment through this advisor?
Sure. So one person I spoke to did, and I was connected to her through one of my sources who didn't get an apartment. She had actually gone as far as signing a lease for an apartment, and then she says that when she asked David Michael for the keys, he started to sort of evade her, and I've seen the texts that show that. And so she decided to go knock on what she thought was going to be her future apartment's door. And she says that a woman opened the door and told her that she had also just signed a lease for that apartment with David Michael. So I actually spoke to that person, and she confirmed that she had gotten that apartment through him.
And again, to be super clear, the headline in your story is about an alleged scammer, and I guess that's because although he has lost cases in small claims court, he's never been arrested or prosecuted?
That's, well, as far as I know, I reached out to all of the local district attorneys in each borough and also the New York State Attorney General, and they didn't have any case about him that they could confirm. The state attorney general did say that they had 4 complaints about him and that they were looking into them.
And so, on a more general basis, is this a case of there ought to be a law? Like the alleged behavior here sounds like it would be illegal, but maybe it's not, or is it complicated?
Sure. So, if this happens to you, if you have to pay, or if you're made to pay a good faith deposit, for example, there is a 2019 law that outlawed that, and that's when you have to pay a deposit to take an apartment off of the market. So there's a 2019 law that even made just that illegal. There's also all sorts of restrictions on brokers' fees that we've heard a lot about from the FAIR Act that was passed in 2024. But also if this happens to you and you realize that you've been defrauded, or if you're looking for an apartment and you realize that you've been defrauded and you start to look into it and realize that there are other people who it's also happened to, there is a criminal law called scheme to defraud, which, that's when there is a pattern of someone that's using deceitful practices and intentionally defrauding multiple people. So that is also illegal.
So what you have, I guess, is potential tenants, aspiring tenants, claiming that they've been defrauded, correct me if I'm wrong, but claiming to you, a journalist, why don't they go to the police, or have they?
Yeah, so several people that I spoke to did say that they went to the police. They thought maybe that they could mediate between them and David Michael, or that they could at least file a police report. But police told them that there was nothing that they could do because it seemed like just a contract dispute. And I did reach out to the police, the NYPD, and they did say, we had one complaint about David Michael, and in that case, it was a contract dispute. So they also referred that person to small claims court. And I spoke to also just legal experts that said that, that they should be taking police reports, that police should be taking police reports. But that's what happened in the cases that of the people that I spoke to, is that police told them that they should go to small claims.
Well, are there any government agencies that are tasked with investigating these kinds of allegations by prospective renters, or is everybody just on their own? They have to get a lawyer or not get a lawyer and go to small claims court and take their chances.
Sure. So there is a hodgepodge of agencies that look into scams and when people are defrauded. For example, there's the city's Consumer Protection Agency, and they take complaints, but, it's a small, they have a small team of investigators, and they deal with consumer issues across the board. So in the cases of the people that I spoke to, the Consumer Protection Agency also referred them to the district attorneys. And most of the people that I spoke to for the story said that they dealt with David Michael in Queens. And so that would also be the Queens District Attorney, who they could go to file a complaint.
At 11:01, with WNYC and Gothamist reporter Catalina Gonella on her story, how an alleged New York City real estate scammer stayed in business despite years of complaints. And you, if you have any kind of related story in your experience, 212-433, WNYC, 212-433-9692, call or text. You did have luck locating Mr. Michael. What did he have to say about these claims by prospective renters?
Sure. So I spoke to David Michael on several occasions over the phone, once, and over email, and once in person. And what he says is that he deals with he helps a lot of tenants and landlords, and that these are just a few unhappy customers, and he denies any, he contests any allegations that he's committed any crimes.
And several of the people you talk to, I see, say they won in small claims court against him. How specific were the findings by the court in any of those cases? And then did they get their money back?
Sure. So in small claims court, it's not, like a typical trial. You file a form and then you go and present your own case in front of a judge. It's a very simplified process so that people don't need to have an attorney. And so in all of the cases of the people that I spoke to, David Michael didn't show up to the trials, so they got default judgment. So the judge just basically agreed with their side when they presented in front of them. And the judgments basically say, David Michael owes this person X amount of money, and they usually also include interest for the time that has passed since the incident happened. So it's pretty clear in that way. It's not very the judgments aren't very detailed. They just basically say that that the judge agreed that David Michael owes them this amount of money. But from there, it's sort of on the person to go and get their money from David Michael. The court does not enforce those judgments. They have to go through the process of hiring a city marshal and telling the city marshal where David Michael has his money. And people found that process very difficult and frustrating and were not able to do that.
Here's somebody who I think you interviewed for your story, Julia in Glendale, Queens. You're on WNYC. Hi, Julia.
Hi, this is Julia Sinelnikova. I'm an artist. I've called in multiple times, and I wasn't interviewed for this story. But however,
I'm sorry. I got that wrong. I want to clarify. I got that wrong. Somehow I had that impression, but go ahead.
No worries. So this is the status of small claims court in New York City. I had a contract with a local development corporation. I'm a public artist that went awry in 21, and I filed a claim that year. So we were finally heard after the entity was able to punt, because they're able to punt till the end of 2023, to have the hearing rescheduled. And we were heard by the judge. So ever since I was heard in 23, it now being nearly 2027, when I call the court, they tell me the judge moved. This is Brooklyn Small Claims Court. So the judge was moved out of that court during that year, and the court will not assign a new judge or give me a judgment. And when I went to small claims the first day, the day we had the hearing, I would tell you there were hundreds of people just on hearing day. So you're looking at like 200 people who are about to be heard, who are about to be in my position. I have since reached out to Mayor Eric Adams a year and a half ago. This month, I finally reached out to my representative, Raj Kamal. I was positively received, but I haven't heard back. And I was asked by Small Claims Court when I called this month to write a letter to the current presiding judge to ask them to reopen the case. So it's not possible to get money from small claims, right? It's not possible. They don't have cases that they move. Perhaps they choose, on a picking which one they want to move basis. Perhaps they move some cases, but in my case, I filed and I went to trial. I did everything right, and I go to work, I pay my taxes. I'm a local person, who participates in the community, but I'm not able, even through reaching out to multiple agencies such as the mayor's office, talking to someone for an hour, talking to my local representative recently, and repeatedly calling the court, every 6 months at the minimum. I'm not able to ever get this case judged.
Sound familiar, Catalina, about small claims court?
Well, the frustration definitely sounds very, very familiar. In the cases that I spoke to, the issue, or the people that I spoke to, they say that the difficulty was first in just even getting to a hearing because they couldn't find David Michael in order to serve him. So there were there was that issue. And then for the people who were able to find him and were able to serve him and had a hearing, even after all of that, and they did get their judgment, they weren't able to locate his bank accounts in order to collect that money. So those are the frustrations that I heard about.
Here, thank you for that context, Julia. Obviously, the relevance to the story was her frustration with getting anything out of small claims court. Here is a text that came in with a story. I moved in March from Astoria to Sunnyside. Multiple brokers asked me for fees. Even with the new legislation, one specifically said if I paid the fee, they would lease me the apartment at the lower rent-stabilized rent. Well, that certainly doesn't sound legal, does it? You did write a companion piece for Gothamist, to this story of these individual cases called How to Avoid Rental Scams in New York City and What to Do If You Become the Victim of One. So maybe that fits in.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like there is, there's different sorts of fees that come up when people are trying to rent an apartment from, many conversations that I've had. And one, is the good faith deposit, which is when a broker might ask someone for a deposit to take an apartment off of the market before a lease is even signed. And then there are the broker's fees, which I think it sort of sounds like that the text that you got was more along those lines, which, the FAIR Act tried to regulate, where, you can only your brokers are only supposed to charge the party that hired them the broker's fee. But, going back to that article that I wrote, just the accompanying article, a lot of the legal experts and the real estate experts that I spoke to said, one way to avoid this is to just never send money before a lease is signed. So definitely try to first get that lease in hand before paying any sort of fee or deposit that's more than that $20 application fee.
So one thing that came up a few times in your article, I think, is that the renters didn't have great credit scores, and the ads were targeted to people who might have trouble going through a broker, correct?
Right. So several of the people, if not most of the people that I spoke to said, I didn't have great credit. I was striking out on apps like StreetEasy or Zillow, and so they turned to Craigslist, where they found David Michaels listings. And I've seen some of these listings myself, and they do, have language that's, no quote, no credit, no problem. So they, in retrospect, in hindsight, the people I spoke to say that they felt, that they had been targeted in that way.
So to close, just to help people, as much as you can, in very general terms, how to avoid rental scams in New York City, the headline of that piece, and what to do if you become the victim of one. On the prevention side of that, what are the main cues that things aren't on the up and up before you even get involved with somebody?
Sure. So you actually mentioned one of the things in the intro to the segment, which was, a lot of the real estate experts that I spoke to said, if something seems too good to be true, sort of trust your gut and follow that instinct, and it probably is. And then beyond that, if once you're, dealing with a broker, there are certain red flags. For example, if they do ask you to send them money through direct cash apps like Zelle or Cash App or Venmo, they tell me that legitimate real estate brokers won't have you do that. So that's another thing to watch out for. And then always something that you can definitely do is, just like I did, look up the person that you're dealing with, look them up in the state's directory of licenses, and you can check that they are licensed.
Catalina Gonella from WNYC and Gothamist, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.